My ex used me for money while I supported her dreams, so I stopped paying, left silently, and watched her perfect life collapse slowly afterward. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and for most of my early 20s, I genuinely believed that being supportive, steady, and dependable was what love was supposed to be. I met Jessica when she was barely scraping by, juggling night classes, a part-time job at a cafe, and a handful of creative projects she was convinced would one day change everything. At the time, it seemed like the perfect match. She was ambitious, restless, alive with ideas, and I was calm, grounded, the person she could lean on. I liked the feeling of being needed. I told myself it was love, but really, it felt a lot like purpose. From the start, I quietly started covering things. Rent, groceries, her late tuition payments, her phone bill, random emergencies I didn't ask about, I just did it. Some nights I'd come home from a double shift, shoulders aching, fingers stiff, and still make her coffee for early classes, listening to her talk about a canvas she'd been working on or an idea for a freelance project she was chasing. I framed it in my head as investment, as love, as support for someone I trusted completely. I prided myself on being the stable one, the quiet backbone, while she chased her dreams, oblivious, or maybe just unbothered, by the financial safety net I was laying under her. Friends noticed. "Dude, you're working yourself to the bone," they'd say over beers or late-night calls, "and she's barely lifting a finger." I shrugged. They didn't understand. I told myself they didn't get love like ours, that sacrifice was part of the package, and someone had to be the responsible one. I pictured us building a future together, her creativity finally blooming, and me quietly smiling as the guy who made it all possible. But even as I poured myself into her life, there was a small, nagging voice I tried to ignore. Sometimes I noticed little inconsistencies, bills that didn't add up, her casual mentions of money I didn't know about, but I brushed them off. I told myself trust was everything, that love required faith, and that I was doing the right thing. I had no idea how much that same faith, that same generosity, would one day be used against me, twisting the life I built into something I'd barely recognize. And yet, at that moment, I felt like the luckiest guy alive. I remember the nights getting longer, my body heavier, and the weight of responsibility pressing into my chest like a physical thing. Jessica would come home from class, cheeks flushed from excitement about some project or collaboration, and I'd greet her with a smile, hiding how exhausted I was. "Hey, babe, did you eat yet?" I'd ask, pouring coffee into the chipped mug she always left on the counter. She'd shrug, grab the mug, and talk animatedly about her day, about that networking event, or the sketch she finally finished, or the freelance opportunity that seemed like it would change everything. I nodded, listened, smiled, and my hands shook a little inside, not from anger, but from the constant pressure of being the guy who fixed everything behind the scenes. It didn't feel like a burden at first. It felt necessary. She was chasing her dreams, and I was the one who got to hold the scaffolding in place. My friends still nudged me, teasing about how I was practically her sugar daddy. "Dude, she's living like a queen and you're bending over backwards," one of them said over text. I laughed it off, typing back, "I'm just helping her get there, it's nothing." Deep down, I started feeling a flicker of something I couldn't quite name, unease, but I pushed it aside. I noticed little things, a new pair of designer shoes she never mentioned buying, a coffee subscription she didn't ask me about, the occasional mysterious receipt tucked into her notebook. Each time, I asked, "Hey, did you need money for this?" and she'd just laugh, tossing her hair back, "Oh, don't worry about it, I got it." And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I told myself these were small things, trivial blips, and that love meant trust, even when it stung a little in the back of my mind. But slowly, I started realizing something uncomfortable. Her world was growing, thriving, and I was the invisible force holding it all together. My bank account was draining faster than I noticed, my energy depleted, and my nights became quieter, lonelier, and heavier. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was building something that might not be mine to enjoy. Something was off, but I didn't know how deep it ran. And that unease, small and subtle at first, was about to explode in ways I couldn't have prepared for. It started with little things that gnawed at me in the quiet hours. I'd glance at our shared calendar and notice a lunch meeting she hadn't mentioned, or overhear her on the phone giggling about a networking opportunity with someone I didn't know. At first, I tried to rationalize it. She's ambitious, she's building connections, it's part of her world, I'm just being paranoid. But the pit in my stomach refused to go away. My friends began asking questions again, more pointed this time. "Are you sure she's honest about her side hustles?" one of them asked over beers, and I laughed nervously. Yeah, she's fine. Trust me." I wasn't fine, though. One evening, I came home from a 14-hour shift, my body screaming for rest, and found her sprawled on the couch, laptop open, surrounded by sketchbooks and receipts. "Hey, babe," I said softly, setting my bag down, "everything okay?" She didn't look up, typing furiously. "Yeah, just finalizing a project." "I've got this under control," she replied without meeting my eyes. But something in her tone, the way she avoided looking at me, made my stomach twist. I went to sit beside her, catching a glimpse of a credit card statement on the screen, one I didn't recognize. My heart skipped. "Jessica, whose card is that?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. She froze for a fraction of a second, eyes darting, then forced a smile. "Oh, just an old account I'm cleaning up," she said lightly, closing the tab. My chest tightened. I wanted to believe her, but a seed of doubt had taken root. I couldn't shake the creeping suspicion that things weren't as transparent as I thought, that my trust, and my money, might be quietly taken for granted. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the city outside, my body exhausted but my mind racing. The apartment smelled faintly of her coffee and paint, a comfort I no longer felt fully at ease in. Something had shifted. I knew it, even if I couldn't yet name it. And in that uneasy stillness, I realized that what I had believed was love might actually be the start of a very different story, one where I was giving everything, and she might be taking more than I could ever see. And I didn't know how long it would take for the truth to surface. By this point, my days were starting to blur together: work, bills, errands, Jessica's projects, and the constant mental accounting of everything I was covering for her. I remember one evening, dragging myself home from a double shift, my shoes scuffing against the cracked tile of our hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Jessica was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sketchbook open, colors splattered across her jeans, headphones in, completely absorbed. "Hey, I'm home," I said quietly, hoping for a smile, a glance, something. She barely looked up, muttering, almost done with this piece." That small, distracted acknowledgement stung more than I expected. I could feel the exhaustion pooling inside me, but I forced a smile anyway. I kept thinking, this is temporary. Just one more month of covering her rent, one more week of making sure she eats, one more shift to make sure her tuition is paid. Friends noticed my constant tiredness. "Man, you're burning out," one said, handing me a cold beer at a party. I laughed it off, murmuring, "I'm fine, just helping her get through school." The truth was, I wasn't fine. I was sinking under the weight of silent sacrifice, feeling invisible in a life I thought we were building together. Then there were the little things that kept nagging: receipts for things I didn't know about, packages arriving with no explanation, a charge on my card she forgot to mention. I'd ask casually, "Hey, did you need money for this?" and she'd shrug, tossing her hair and saying, "I've got it, don't worry." The words sounded innocent, almost playful, but my gut screamed that something was off. I could feel the unease growing, a quiet storm swirling in the background of what was supposed to be a safe home. At night, I'd lie awake in the dim glow of our bedroom, hearing the hum of her laptop downstairs, thinking about all the money I'd spent, all the hours I'd worked, all the quiet support I'd given. I wondered if she even noticed, or if she simply expected it. The apartment, once warm and full of shared dreams, now felt heavy, like the walls themselves were watching me give everything while she got comfortable taking it. And somewhere deep down, I knew that my generosity, my trust, was quietly being used in ways I couldn't yet understand. I never expected to find out the truth the way I did. One Saturday, I was doing laundry, folding my own shirts, when I noticed a pile of mail she had left on the counter. Curiosity, or maybe unease, made me flip through it, and my stomach dropped. Credit card statements, receipts, and invoices, all of them pointing to expenses she claimed were her own, but clearly funded by me. Designer bags, fancy dinners, last-minute trips I'd never been told about. I felt my chest tighten, my hands trembling, and for the first time, it hit me. She hadn't just relied on me, she had been spending my money, building a life she'd been presenting as entirely hers. I confronted her that evening. "Jessica, why are these charges in my account? You never mention any of this." Her eyes widened for a split second, then she laughed nervously, brushing it off. "Oh, that? I just borrowed a little for some supplies. I'll pay you back." I could feel my pulse rising, every nerve screaming that I had been manipulated. "Borrowed?" I asked, voice low and sharp. "These are thousands. You've been living off me this whole time." She leaned back, shrugging like it was no big deal. "You're overreacting. I thought you knew. I mean, it's not like it's that much." And there it was, the casual dismissal, the way she treated my money, my effort, and my sacrifice as disposable. I wanted to scream, to hit something, but instead, I just stood there, breathing heavily, feeling the cold realization wash over me. The person I loved, the person I trusted completely, had been using me this whole time, quietly constructing a perfect life on the foundation I'd built for us both. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, every fiber of me torn between anger, hurt, and disbelief. The apartment felt smaller, heavier, almost suffocating. I realized that every sacrifice I thought was building our future had only been building her illusion. And for the first time, I began to see the plan she had orchestrated, the life she presented to everyone as her own, funded entirely by me. I didn't know how long I could stand it, how long I could let her get away with it, but I knew one thing for certain: things were about to change. That weekend, I made a decision I'd been avoiding for weeks. I was done footing the bill for her life while she painted herself as independent. I didn't announce it, didn't confront her with threats or accusations, I simply stopped. The next rent payment went unpaid, the utilities I usually covered sat untouched, and I kept my bank card tucked safely in my pocket. I told myself this wasn't revenge, it was boundaries, but my chest still felt heavy with guilt. Every instinct screamed that I was being cruel, but deep down I knew I had to see if she could stand on her own. The first day without my support was quiet, almost unnervingly so. I heard her rummaging in the kitchen, muttering under her breath, realizing the credit cards she borrowed from me weren't magically topped up. "Why isn't this working?" she shouted, her voice cracking with frustration. I stayed in my room, listening to the panic, feeling a conflicted mix of satisfaction and unease. The smell of burnt coffee drifted up from the kitchen, the small chaos of her unraveling life hitting every corner of the apartment. I could hear the shuffle of papers, the flustered taps on her laptop, and the frustrated sighs that finally made me close my eyes and breathe. By the evening, she came into my room, eyes wide and flustered. You can't just stop helping me. I didn't plan for this." Her words were sharp, pleading, and for the first time, I saw her vulnerability, not the confident, ambitious woman I thought I knew, but a person entirely dependent on me. I said nothing, just met her gaze quietly, letting the silence hang in the room like a blade. The tension was thick, the hum of the heater in the background almost deafening in its normalcy. For the first time, I felt the power shift subtly between us. And even as I watched her struggle, there was a small, gnawing fear in my chest. Could I live with the guilt of letting her fail? I didn't answer the question, I didn't need to. Because the next few days would reveal just how much of her perfect life had been built on me, and I had front row seats to watch it start to crumble. By midweek, the cracks in her perfect life were impossible to ignore. I came home one evening to find her sitting on the kitchen floor, surrounded by unopened bills and her laptop open to emails she hadn't responded to. The smell of burnt toast lingered in the air, and the hum of the refrigerator sounded louder than usual, like it was mocking her chaos. I don't know what to do," she whispered, voice trembling as she rifled through a pile of letters. Her hand shook, and I could see the panic etched into every line of her face. For the first time, the confident, ambitious woman I knew seemed small, exposed, and helpless. I watched from the doorway, my chest tight with a strange mixture of vindication and unease. She had spent years building this image, a life of success, excitement, and independence, all while leaning on me without acknowledgement. "Why didn't you tell me you were behind on rent?" I asked gently, not out of kindness, but because I needed her to see reality. She looked up, eyes wide, panic morphing into frustration. I thought I could handle it. I didn't think it would pile up like this." Her voice cracked, desperation spilling over in ways I'd never heard before. Over the next few days, small disasters compounded. Emails went unanswered, suppliers started chasing her, and friends who had once admired her success began questioning her stories. The glossy life she posted online was falling apart in real time, and the cracks were spreading fast. I could hear the tension in her footsteps, the frantic tapping on her keyboard, the occasional muttered curse as another plan failed. It was as if the apartment itself had absorbed the weight of her unraveling, the air thick with anxiety and regret. At night, I lay awake listening to the low hum of her laptop, feeling a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in our dynamic. For the first time, she wasn't untouchable, wasn't in control, she was scrambling, exposed, and the balance of power had shifted entirely. And yet, even as I watched her struggle, a part of me ached. This wasn't the life I wanted, but it was the consequence of years of unacknowledged trust, a life built on my sacrifices that she had taken for granted. I had pulled back, and now I could see the real cost. But the worst was yet to come. It didn't take long before Jessica realized she couldn't just scramble in silence anymore. One evening, she burst into the bedroom where I was sitting, tired but alert, her face flushed, eyes wide with disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" she demanded, hands shaking, voice sharp. I stayed quiet, letting her words hang in the air like a storm cloud. I can't pay the bills, I can't handle this on my own, and you just stopped helping." Her voice cracked, a mixture of anger and panic. I felt a strange calmness wash over me, the tension in the room thick enough to taste, almost metallic in the air. I finally spoke, quietly but firmly. "I'm not doing this anymore, Jessica. I've been covering everything for years, and it's not sustainable. I'm done being the safety net for your life." The words seemed to shock her, and I could see it, the disbelief, the betrayal flickering in her eyes. "You can't just," she started, then stopped, realizing she had no power here, no control over the reality she had ignored for so long. The hum of the heater and the faint city noise outside filled the silence that followed, heavy and suffocating. She paced the room, pulling at her hair, muttering curses under her breath. "This isn't fair, you promised." Her desperation hung in the air, mingling with the smell of her coffee cup that had been left untouched on the nightstand. I let her stew in it, letting reality do the work I could no longer fix with money or effort. She had always counted on me, and now she was forced to face life without the safety net I had silently provided. I could see her faltering, realizing how much she had relied on me, how much of her perfect life was really mine. And in that moment, I knew the balance had shifted irreversibly. She was scrambling, powerless, and finally, painfully aware that the world she had built for show was crumbling, and there was nothing I could do to catch her. But even as she struggled, I felt the ache of guilt and uncertainty creeping in, wondering if I had gone too far. It was the day I realized just how deep the collapse went. I came home after a long shift, expecting the usual chaos, but this time, it was worse. The apartment was silent, except for the occasional crumpled paper fluttering against the floor. Bills were stacked haphazardly on the counter, some unopened, some with bright red overdue notices glaring back at me. Her laptop sat closed, a sticky note on the screen with a frantic scribble, "I can't do this anymore. Everything's falling apart." My chest tightened, a knot forming that wasn't just sympathy, it was a mix of guilt, shock, and the bitter taste of vindication. She sat on the couch, knees pulled to her chest, eyes glassy, staring at the floor. I've lost everything," she whispered. Her voice trembled, barely audible over the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but something in me stopped. I couldn't. I had given everything for her success, and now I was watching her life unravel because she had taken it all for granted. The weight of years of silent support crashed down in that moment, and I realized that her downfall wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. I remembered the moments I had bent over backward for her, covering rent she never mentioned, paying tuition she claimed she was handling, running errands while she focused on her portfolio. All those sacrifices, all those nights I sacrificed sleep and sanity, had been used as a stepping stone for her perfect facade. And now, the foundation was cracking, and she had nowhere to turn. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that she had relied entirely on someone else to prop up her life, and now the consequences were unavoidable. I felt a heavy mix of sorrow and grim satisfaction, the emotional stakes hitting me like a punch. The apartment felt colder, emptier, and I understood that this rock bottom wasn't just hers, it was a mirror of what happens when trust is exploited too long. And even as I watched her crumble, I knew the final chapters of this story were just beginning. The days that followed felt strangely quiet, almost surreal. Jessica barely spoke, moving through the apartment like a ghost of the confident, ambitious woman she once was. Bills went unpaid, emails remained unanswered, and her carefully curated perfect life was unraveling before my eyes. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the anxious tapping of her fingers on the counter, the way her gaze flicked constantly to her phone, hoping for a lifeline that wouldn't come. It was subtle, quiet, but it was everywhere, the hum of failure permeating every corner of the space we shared. For the first time, I realized just how fragile the world she had built truly was. Friends and colleagues started noticing too. Questions arose, whispers circulated. The polished image she had spent years crafting began to crack, revealing the truth that her life was, in many ways, built on borrowed stability. I caught glimpses of her frustration in texts to her friends, her insistence that she could handle everything, and the slowly dawning realization that no one else could bail her out. The apartment smelled faintly of burnt coffee and stale air, a reminder of the nights she had neglected basic needs in pursuit of appearances. Every small misstep, every missed payment, every failed plan piled on like a quiet reckoning. I felt a mix of relief and guilt. Watching her struggle wasn't satisfying in the way I had imagined, it was uncomfortable, almost painful, but it was the only way she could finally confront the reality of her choices. I had stopped being her safety net, and now reality itself was teaching lessons that words never could. And in that silence, I began to reclaim pieces of myself, my time, my energy, my mental space. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was constantly giving while losing. Even as she grappled with the consequences, I felt a subtle shift in myself. I wasn't angry anymore, I wasn't desperate to control the outcome. Instead, there was a quiet clarity, a sense of empowerment that came from stepping back and letting life unfold on its own terms. But I knew the final confrontation, the one that would truly define the ending of this chapter, was still ahead. By this point, I felt a strange sense of calm I hadn't known in years. The tension that had gripped me, the constant worry, the endless calculations, the sleepless nights, was slowly lifting. I could finally breathe without the weight of her life pressing down on me. I spent mornings drinking coffee on the balcony, watching the city wake up, the crisp air brushing against my face, and I realized I had regained something far more valuable than money or control, my peace. Jessica's chaos was still unfolding inside, but outside, I felt untouchable in a way I hadn't before. She started reaching out more, asking for help, apologizing, trying to salvage her image. I listened politely, offering only small gestures of kindness, nothing that would let her slide back into reliance. I thought I could handle it all on my own, she admitted one night, voice cracking as she stared at the floor. I nodded quietly, feeling neither anger nor pity, just clarity. Her struggles weren't punishment from me, they were a mirror reflecting choices she had made over years. And for the first time, I understood the difference between love and enablement. Friends noticed the change in me too. "You look lighter, happier," one said, and I realized I was finally living without the invisible burden I had carried for so long. I was reclaiming the energy, the time, the boundaries I had ignored in the name of love. The apartment no longer felt heavy, it was quiet, but in a comforting way. The scent of morning coffee and sunlight streaming through the blinds felt like a reminder that life was still mine to shape, mine to protect. I had given her everything, and she had built a life on my trust, but now I had given myself something even more precious, freedom. And as I sat there, watching the first light of dawn spill across the floor, I knew that the final chapter, the part where I fully stepped away, was coming. The story was almost over, and I could finally feel the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. The final weeks were quiet, almost anticlimactic, but in a way that felt perfect. Jessica was forced to face the consequences of her choices, alone. I no longer felt the need to micromanage her life, to cover for her mistakes, or to bear the weight of a life she had built on my sacrifices. Instead, I focused on myself, my work, my health, my friends, and my own ambitions that had been on hold for far too long. The apartment smelled of fresh coffee in the mornings, sunlight poured through the blinds, and for the first time in years, I felt like I truly belonged in my own space. She reached out a few times, half apologetic, half demanding, trying to regain some semblance of control. I listened, nodded politely, and reminded myself that nothing I gave her now would fix the past. "I've learned my lesson," she said quietly one afternoon, voice low, eyes avoiding mine. I simply nodded, sipping my coffee, feeling neither vindication nor pity, just a sense of closure. Her collapse wasn't my victory, it was the natural consequence of years of reliance on someone else's generosity. I reflected on the man I had been, the one who gave everything without boundaries, who mistook love for sacrifice, who let someone else's life consume his own. And I realized I had finally become someone different, someone who could love without losing himself, who could care without enabling, who could give without being drained. My patience, my integrity, my silent strength had carried me through the worst of it, and now, finally, I could breathe. The best part? Life moved forward. Friends admired the way I handled myself, quietly, without drama, while Jessica rebuilt what she could, having learned the hard way that trust and support are not infinite. I didn't need revenge, I didn't need confrontation. The story closed not with chaos or anger, but with empowerment and self-respect. I had survived, I had grown, and I had reclaimed my life. Sitting in the quiet of my apartment, sunlight spilling across the floor, I finally understood, some of the hardest lessons in love are also the most freeing. And for the first time, I felt truly, unmistakably free.